I want to talk about the truth about fear here. This is going to be an interesting one because this is definitely something that's completely controlling people, and we could make good reason why anything that's fearful would control you because it's fearful. I mean, it makes sense. Anything that you would say can instill fear inside you, I'd like to say. You'd probably say, yeah, there's a good reason for that to control me. I don't know what to do when I'm in a state of fear. I don't know. We could even relate to like some very basic ideas of fear. Like if you have a fear of like, say spiders, and there was a pretty large spider, I'm just saying, maybe a decently sized spider crawling like next to you or in your home, you might freak out. You might even not know what to do. Or if you saw a mouse scurry right across the room, or if you maybe even if you did something adventurous, like say you went on a roller coaster, on like one that's like one of the highest roller coasters you'd never probably ever think of going on, and maybe that's not the problem either, because people get used to roller coasters and they like that adventure. But the idea is like people could like spiders too. I'm just saying, the idea of fear, if we could think of anything that can be fearful, you got to think of something. I mean, it's normal. It's normal to be in fear. When's the last time you actually froze out of fright? I mean, just think about it. Even if somebody like popped out doing a joke, like they were doing some kind of prank, and like they jumped out from an area you didn't know they were, and you froze and you were like, what? And you didn't know what to do. Or, it's weird. Fear is something that takes over. It can totally freeze us in our place. It can totally make us be the person that we're not. But it's hard to control that. I mean, you'd be ridiculous to say that, fear is just something that shouldn't exist. I mean, look at your interpretation. Your interpretation actually is creating that fear, but that interpretation needs to be there, because that interpretation was created. It was created from your experiences of life. It was created from how you've just been influenced to think and feel from something that has occurred. Could be something you've learned. So fear is there. Fear is just, it's there. But I'd like to say, obviously, with more experience, more knowledge, definitely more experience, but not to say the knowledge part wouldn't be exponentially helpful. I mean, obviously, the more you know, the more you may be triggered to go into those thoughts and those memories and those ideas that could actually catapult you to the next level of something that's scary or intimidating or fearful. I mean, look at that. The power of the mind comes into action like sometimes when we need it the most, and hopefully so. That's why it's good to learn, because you never know when you're going to be able to access that information. So power is extremely occurring because of knowledge. So knowledge is power, but so is experience. Experience is extremely powerful. You can experience something that can give you the validation that maybe, yeah, that is fearful. I have the experience that validates it. Or, yeah, it's actually not that fearful. I had the experience that validates that. So it's like it gives you the idea that, our experience is everything. I mean, everything you experience is what you're experiencing. Fear is definitely a contributable factor to our existence. It's going to give you the tools to possibly overcome and challenge you to become more of what you could be. I mean, if we think of like life and death for a second, if something was to be fearful from like a death perspective, like we could die or something, and when we freeze or we don't know what to do, even if we have all the knowledge and education and experience necessary, it's like you still could freeze. It's like, geez, look how powerful fear is. It's like one of those things that people that want to achieve, like, no, I'm going to fight my fear. And that gives them the advantage in almost any situation. Not to say, you should just be like unintelligent. I mean, there's something called being not smart and being kind of ignorant, because you think like you can overcome this fear, but you put yourself in jeopardy. You put yourself in harm's way, or another person. And it's like, wait a second. You're supposed to overcome, compensate towards overcoming at least fear. But the problem is, we may do that in a harmful way. Just because you can overcome fear, it's like, oh yeah, great, I can overcome my fears in almost anything. Yeah, but you almost died, or you put someone else at risk of being harmed. It's like, hang on a second. There's a way to overcome this. And I'm not talking about just life in and of itself. Like, of course, like, it would be great to have the skills and the knowledge when you're in an experience and where, like, yeah, you could be harmed, you could die, or someone else, and it's like, totally, like, you want to be able to overcome that fear, but not at the cost of yourself or anyone else. And maybe at some point in life, that, I don't want to say that's going to be the case, that could be the case. I'm going to say it's like an extremely rare situation, but life is crazy sometimes. Like, I don't even like even talking about that, because I don't like talking about things that could be really bad, but or just extremely terrible. You see, here's the thing. We don't realize fear is actually controlling our life. It's not only something that can control our experience with whatever we're experiencing. Maybe something feels fearful and it's there. It's like, okay. But I'm not talking about just that. I'm talking about your life. Now, if you think about it for a second, like, fear could exist, right? It could exist. Even to the person who's the most fearless, it could still exist to them. But I'm not talking about if it exists. I'm not even talking about could it exist. I'm talking about that it exists, and you don't notice it. Just like anything you wouldn't notice. See, this is the problem. It's not fear that's the problem. It's the fact that we don't notice it exists. It's ignored. It's denied. It's pretended. It's okayed. It's not there. How could it be there if it's not there? It's not there. I'm not afraid. Because we're not looking at fear as, like, the context of which I'm referring it to. I'm not talking about being scared of someone or something. I'm talking about being afraid to be you. Which is weird. How could you be afraid to be you? Well, this is the deal. I'm going to give the explanation here. Afraid to be you is something that could have occurred your whole entire life, and you may not even have noticed it. How could you not notice something that has occurred your entire life? It's pretty weird if you think about it. But it's actually not if we try to relate it to anything in life. Like, for example, you could have lived in the same home your whole life, or most of your life, and you may have not noticed, I don't know, a particular picture a particular way. So think about that. You could live in the same home your whole life, the same pictures up on the walls or whatever, and you may not have noticed it a particular way on a particular day. Your whole entire life. And all of a sudden you notice it, you're like, wait a second, that's weird. Why is that popping out to me a little bit more? Or why am I noticing that more? That's weird. And you may even blow it off because it's just a picture. It's not a big deal. And maybe even the idea of how you're looking at it isn't really that imperative. But you can see what I'm saying. You could live your whole life not noticing certain things. And maybe you don't need to, and maybe you should. It depends. People don't notice things their whole entire life regardless. They don't notice that they had, like, a mole on their body, a mole on their arm or something. And they never really paid attention to it. Not really there. Not noticing it. And maybe it's really harmful. Maybe it's not. how much should you pay attention to something? It's not the matter of how much should you pay attention to anything, or notice something or notice not anything to begin with. None of that's the problem. The problem is that the thing you should be paying attention to, you're not. That's the problem. But you can't pay attention to something if it doesn't exist. You can't pay attention to something you're unaware about. You can't pay attention to something you're just not paying attention to. That's just life. You can't do that. It's impossible. You can't pay attention to 5 feet below the Earth's surface of where you may be standing and notice what's existing down there. You can't see what's not present. We could only notice what's occurring. Now, the fact is, you could notice what's not observable because you could use your mind. You could use the possibility of furthering an interpretation of something that doesn't exist or something that could exist. That's called creativity and imagination and cognitive ability. So with that, you could actually perceive the possibility of something that normally wouldn't exist, and it becomes something that you experience. So the idea here is it's very interesting how the mind and body work. We could use it to our advantage. And the idea with all this is there's this idea of fear that we don't notice. Because we're not looking at fear the way that I'm trying to explain it. The way I think we usually look at fear is like something that's scary, something that can put fright into me, something that can pause me in my position and I kind of freeze, something in which I overreact to because I need to. I'm scared, right? Or I'm in fear. It's like that all makes sense. But what if the fear was not only just about that, but what if the fear that I'm referring to is about you? Scared to exist. Scared to be. So, what I'm trying to say here is, if there is fear, and the fear that scared to be, scared to exist, the idea with this is that if this is true, or if this is possible, that your mind doesn't really contribute, doesn't really allow or enable you to be the real you. Because there's fear. So what we'll try to understand here, it's very odd that if that is true, how would you know? And this is now, in a way, the confusion or the problem that our mind won't be willing to take on or challenged with, because the very idea of this puts the mind in a predicament, almost like checkmate. In chess, the game of chess, when you're advancing towards your opponent's side of the board, or even on your own side of the board, your job is to try to create an atmosphere or an environment in where you can, with intention, find success and eventually win in the game. And eventually you can put your opponent in a very awkward predicament of being checked. So they have to move, they have to protect, they have to defend. And if they don't, then they're going to possibly lose the game, or, people don't want to lose the game. They're trying to play a game. But it's more than that to some people. It means a lot to them. And it should, because that's what means something to someone. My idea here is your mind doesn't want to lose. Doesn't want to be checked. Doesn't want to be questioned. It doesn't want to be controlled. It doesn't want to be wrong. It will do what it needs to do to defend itself, just like, a game of chess. But unfortunately, it's very different than an actual game, because the mind will lie. The mind will manipulate. The mind will try to convince otherwise. The mind will redirect. The mind will alter other possibilities. The mind will create an environment that now doesn't allow itself to be in check. Just as now, as if you're putting your mind into check, it's like putting you into check. Or it's capitalizing on its ability to create an environment that doesn't allow it to be in check, which can create a state of confusion. Because if you're the other player, and you're the one going against your mind, it's quite certain that this is going to be a challenge. Just like anyone that's playing a game of chess, there could be a great challenge one day that another faces, where the game in itself is just challenging. And this is the problem. Now we're being questioned in a way. What's the truth? Who's right? Is there such thing as the mind taking control? Is there such thing as the mind having more power? Is there such thing as the mind being able to defend? Or such thing as the mind trying to dominate? These are questions we should be asking ourselves, because if my underlying theme here is there's fear, that the mind certainly is, I'd like to say being controlled by, then is controlling you. Just like as if you were to be afraid of anything in the world. That's why I gave examples earlier. People have different fears and, phobias and what have you, which is normal. It's part of existence. This is what happens. But this is likewise very similar. Because if you are in fear to exist, but you exist, but under the illusion of the mind, then quite frankly, how would you know the difference? And how dare you question the mind? And how dare you question any of this? How dare you question authority? Don't do that. Does any of that sound familiar to anyone else that maybe you shouldn't dare to ask questions towards? So we could look at our mind as like this. Definitely a contributable factor to how we exist. But if we're not realizing how much is contributing, then surely we're living under the I'd like to say under the control. And because there's control, there's an illusion. And with that illusion, you wouldn't know the difference. It'd be almost impossible to know the difference because you live under that dynamic. It's kind of like living under the control of anyone else. You know how many unhealthy relationships exist? They exist all over the place. But people wouldn't say their relationship is unhealthy because they don't want to admit it. They couldn't admit it. You see, it's kind of like an addict. It's called denial, people who deny the truth, even though they're wrong, don't get to realize that they're actually wrong because they can't actually see the truth. It's like someone saying, no, that's not the truth. You're in denial. You're not looking at it right. And that's actually how denial defends itself, because it can't see what it actually is. And that's the truth. That's why if an unhealthy relationship exists, it exists under the realization that it's not that bad. Because, really, it's not. But that person is under the false pretense. They think because they know. But they're protecting, and they're defending, and they're denying. And all that's pretty much the mind. The mind is basically helping us. It's protecting us. It's defending us. In fact, pretty much has been doing this our whole entire lives. But, and as great as that is, because that's really great that we can actually feel like okay, or accommodated, or being helped, protected. But it's not if you look at it, because the mind is protecting us. It's protecting us against a truth that we should know about, we should be aware about, we should actually work towards unfolding, realizing, dissolving the illusion. We would want the mind to help us, but the mind's not going to help you, because if the mind helped you, you'd be really hurt, and you can't be really hurt because the mind is trying to say no. This is why people defend and they deny and they argue back. This is, in fact, one of the main reasons why people argue. They don't want to be wrong. They can't feel wrong. So this is the predicament. It's not about the information. It's not really about how any of it is said, even though that's a big part of how a conversation exists. But it's more so someone's just trying to feel good about themselves. And that's not even noticed. No one would even think that. Even if the conversation was good. How would we ever know? So, the reality is, what we perceive as reality is a concoction. It's a concoction of beliefs and ideas, and thoughts, and experiences, and whatever other influences that can help that create that reality, which could be considered an interpretation to some degree. That reality is based on, I'd like to say, a belief that any of this is helping you to feel safe, secure. So if there's this idea of fear that we can't be here, even though we are here, but it's a version of us. It's not really the authentic us. It's not really the true us. It's a version that's feeling capable, that's feeling confident, that's feeling able, that's doing all the things that maybe most people are able to do. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with any of that. I think this is just a human condition. And I think that if we can't actually go beyond that, or at least notice it, it's the noticing, remember? If you're not noticing, you're not aware, then you might as well just be in a dream. And in a way, that's kind of how we are. We're awake, but we're not really that alert. We're paying attention, but we're not really that aware. we're here, but we're not really here. It's called being present or not being present. And this is kind of like one of those nuanced words. I call it a nuanced word, being present, because I think it goes in different directions of how that you need to be here. But that's pretty much the premise. The premise is to really notice, to really be present, not just physically present, not thinking you know who you are, not thinking like you act like you got it together, and thinking you have all this that's good. There could be a problem with that. Why does all that exist to begin with? And people who are in the opposite direction of this, and they don't want to be here, they don't believe there's anything good about them, they admit to a lot of weaknesses they have about themselves. Both types of people are fighting the same predicament. Fear is what constitutes what I'd like to consider these being abnormalities, or these being basically contingent upon where they came from. So if it comes from fear, it could seem quite normal. Just like anyone in the world who would act out of fear, people could relate and say, man, if I was that person, maybe I'd act like that too. Or if I was in that situation, maybe, or I was like that, I was in that situation, or a similar one, and I acted the same way. We would call that normal. Not necessarily, we could say, is it really healthy, and not to say that's not necessarily the truth also, because it could be healthy to experience fear. It could be healthy to be what we could consider normal. But being normal is quite vague, because being normal is based on an interpretation. So, I like to look at things as like healthy or unhealthy to really get a better understanding of how to look at things. But however you want to look at something is up to you. But if there's fear that's preventing yourself, and you didn't know it, it'd be good to know it. And just realize the mind probably isn't going to be willing to accept such an idea. May laugh at it, scoff at it, joke about it, undermine it, condemn it, and basically not be willing to consider at least a little bit. And even if it considered a little bit, it's kind of not gonna sit around too long with that contemplation. It will be forgotten, just like maybe somebody forgets another person's name. It happens, right? The problem is we're not taking it serious enough. We take it serious, it's quite possible we could find a part of ourselves we never even knew existed. Part of ourselves that wants to exist, but can't. And in a way is trapped. This is the problem. If there's fear about you being you in existence, you probably wouldn't know. So I want to give some examples here. Just to give some just to put a little bit of a light onto this, put a little spotlight on this to say, here are some examples where we could realize fear is existent, and we may not even realize it, and we might even justify how that's not the truth. So I'll give some examples. So here's an example. Let's say you're doing errands, or you're out, you have to go to a store, or what have you, okay? Okay. And let's say through this, you told someone, or someone asked you, to get them whatever it may be, to get them something. Maybe you said, I'm going to get you, I'm going to pick this up for you. All right? Or they said, hey, do you mind just getting that? You're going to that store, or there's a store right down the road. If you don't mind, just save me the trip, and you're in that area, if you don't mind. Yeah? So it seems like pretty legitimate. Seems like a normal situation, maybe. This has occurred, or this could occur. And you go to the stores that you're supposed to go to, okay, and there was this one store you need to go to because you told somebody you would, or they asked you to, and it seemed like agreeable. Here's the thing. It's at that moment we're under this illusion that we need to go do this. Now, I know that sounds like that's not possible. I even offered to go do something, and I said it wasn't a problem. And I also have the time to do it. And what's the big deal? Even if I was under the illusion of fear, what's the problem? I'm going to go do something now. Because we didn't do it yet. Because I want to show you where fear is indicated. See, fear is indicated prior to an experience. Because fear is guiding you into the next experience. It's guiding you. It's the puppeteer with the strings. And you're the puppet. You're the puppet being controlled. And this is where all those things I just mentioned, the what's the big deal, or I said I was going to do it anyway, or it's really not a problem, or I have the time, all those are reinforcing ideas that contribute from the mind to pretty much authorize that this isn't abnormal, that this isn't weird, that you're fine, nothing strange is going on here, and pretty much that fear probably doesn't exist at all, and that's ridiculous. And we can laugh at it as we go to the next store. We don't realize something, though. Now, this is why it becomes very unclear. Such a simple experience like this, we may do, and not even notice it. In fact, what we're noticing is what we offered to do, or what we agreed to do, and what we're doing. Just like all we do is notice kind of like what we're doing in life. We don't really notice beyond it. We don't notice what's controlling it. We don't notice what's behind the scenes. We only see, like, when we're watching a play, we only see what the actors are doing. We don't see how much time the actors have spent rehearsing their lines, or how much time they've practiced on that stage for weeks or months. We don't see what's happening behind the curtain. People who are, in the dressing rooms, or the makeup artists, or the specialists that are in charge of the lights or the music, or the choreography, or setting the right mood, and on and on and on. All you see is the play. And that's fine, because that's what's presented to you. I'm not saying you need to see beyond it, but when it comes to your life, you're not willing to see beyond the play of your life. You are the main actor, or the main actress. You are the main role, but we don't see what's controlling the role. It's not to say that there is something controlling it, but rather, could I try to make a choice here? Could I maybe consider the possibilities of there is an idea of control? Because if that is the truth, the mind won't accept it, but that's why you need to consider the possibility. Possibility allows for the opportunity of something that's not existent to exist. And if that could actually be helpful in your life, then why not promote towards that direction? Why not encourage that, or why not at least consider it? Because if it can help you, why wouldn't you want to then be like, okay, let's see. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. That's better than not. So however you want to go about it, but I believe that such a simple circumstance like that, we don't realize. Now, if we go behind the scenes, as this moment is paused, and we examine it, you can see the play, it's occurring, the person who's the main actor, the stores they went to, maybe there's other actors on the stage. But what happened prior? Well, when a person originally asked to go to the store, or said they would like to pick something up for someone, it's quite possible that they weren't doing that to really be helpful. It's quite possible that they were doing that, so the other person would think better of them, or that the other person would think that's really kind, or that the other person would think something positive. And not even in that moment, but maybe later on that evening, that person would realize, that was really kind. You see, it's an influence. We're not realizing the possibility of our own influence, of why we do anything. Or we don't bring it up. I'm going to go do this for this special person. How about, and what if they're not a special person? Think about the role that they play in their life. What if they're not? What if it's somebody that you feel a little bit more intimidated by or fearful by? And you wouldn't call it that, because you'd call it this as maybe normal. Yet again, the mind constructing how you're viewing things. Maybe it is normal. I'm just trying to give us an understanding. There's a scene back here. Maybe we should consider it. And maybe you're doing it out of an intent that's not necessarily what you consider actually being helpful. But maybe we consider it being helpful, but it's driven by fear. It's driven by anxiety. And maybe them asking us, maybe we don't offer, maybe someone asking us, hey, do you mind helping? We wouldn't say no, because saying no would be awkward. Saying no would also put us in a position of maybe being rejected, or being a problem, or starting a fight. We wouldn't say no to anybody. So this is just another example. Why wouldn't you say no? Why wouldn't you say maybe? Or why wouldn't you just say no? Why wouldn't you just say no, you know what, I don't know, I'm doing a lot, I don't think that's going to be possible. Why wouldn't you just say I'm not going to do it just because I'm doing a lot? Or why wouldn't you say it's possible I'll do it, but sometimes we'll say it's possible we'll do it because there's a little bit of fear that's saying maybe you should, but you're not going to do it for the right reason. You're doing it for other reasons that aren't about that you really want to do it. But you consider that you really want to do it because that seems believable. I do care. Are you sure? There's nothing else going on that's creating what you're doing? So, the problem is, we don't really know what's happening behind the scenes. And if that wasn't enough to try to break down and look at something so simple, let's look at the actual scene. Now you're in the scene and you're about to go to the next store. And you realize, prior to just adventuring off or journeying off to go to the next location, you realize you don't really want to do it. Just a little bit. What's wrong with that? What voice is that? Why would that voice exist? So, we could realize in that moment, what is this voice trying to tell us? Where is it coming from? Is it trying to give me the indication that I don't have to go? But I'm now in a conflict because I feel like I have to. Why do I feel like I have to? Because I said I would, or I agreed to. Why is it not okay to go against that? Because someone would be angry, or someone would be mad, or someone would be disappointed, or I don't seem like I'm now reliable. Why is it that big of a deal? Is it okay for people to feel that way about you? Is it really that important of a situation? Or could you just be honest and say you just don't feel like doing it? Maybe you're tired. I don't know. We don't stop in a moment of uncertainty because it becomes an internal conflict with what we should be doing and how we should be doing anything. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be doing anything or you should be doing anything. All I'm saying is such a simple experience. And we don't even know. I mean, I'm coming from like a very empathetic, like, let's look at you and let's try to understand. What if you're coming from a domineering perspective? What if you're coming from a perspective of like, I'm the authority and I'm supposed to be in charge and I'm the one who's leading here and I'm also the one who's going to put myself in a position that seems like I can be reliable and it could make other people believe that I am or agree that I am, or definitely help me to be more accountable with, I am this better person somehow. Or it's like it gives me something. And is that good? So we could look at all this. Where is all this coming from? What if it was just that you were scared to just do what you want to do to begin with? You didn't want to say no. It's okay not to be, liked. It's okay if somebody has a problem with that. It's okay to not be in charge. It's okay to not just be the authority. It's okay to say, I'm not going to. It's okay to realize that you don't have to do things a certain way. And I'm not trying to say let's just be a completely selfish person and do me, but I am saying if we just look at such a simple experience, we don't realize that fear could be underneath it, diverting our attention, giving us, within reason, why we're doing any of this, because it makes sense. And also, this is just one tiny experience, which may or may not be even true to any extent. Who knows? But that's up to you to try to understand. You see, if something like that is occurring, let's say there is fear, and this is all there's all this stuff behind the scenes. Well, look at this. When you show up at home, there's probably going to be some kind of fear. When you go to work, there's probably some kind of fear. When you're just driving, there's probably some kind of fear. There's probably some kind of fear all the time. If it's just in a simple experience like that, that's not even noticed, And we could even see it a little bit more obvious. So I gave a very, it almost seems obscure in a way. That's why I had to kind of guide it with some imagery and what the situation would look like. But something so simple like people will avoid doing something that they're not good at in front of others. Now I understand that can be uncomfortable. All right, fine, it's uncomfortable. But the reality is that just an extension or a variation from fear that is showing up in other parts of your life? And we think, no, it's just about that one moment. So you're telling me in only one moment, or in moments that are similar, that you avoid or you don't want to be involved in, because it has to do with how you'd be looked at or judged in front of other people. And you're telling me, even if that was true, it's not appearing anywhere else in your life. It only appears in situations where you're doing something in front of others. But that wouldn't appear in other parts of your life. That wouldn't appear in your relationship. That wouldn't appear at work. That wouldn't appear with anything. Only in situations where people can judge? I don't know. Maybe that's true. The idea here is we don't realize fear is contributing to our existence. Who we are and how we are. I mean, think about when the last time you didn't want to tell someone they were wrong. Think about that. Now, of course, how you'd say that would ultimately determine the whole situation and where that is even coming from within us. But the reality is, when's the last time you didn't want to tell someone you didn't like something? Or you had a problem with something? Think about that. And some people use that to their advantage. Oh, I'm always going to speak my mind. I'm going to tell people the way it is. Really? Why? Is there any empathy involved? Should empathy exist? What's the scenario? What's the situation about? See, we just live our lives. We don't sit there and contemplate all this stuff. And I'm not saying you necessarily should, but what I am suggesting that if there is fear, if there's something controlling you, creating your personality, creating your demeanor, creating your reasonability or your, rationalizations or whatever it is, wouldn't you like to know? Wouldn't you like to know who's in charge of you? And we always look at people outside of us that could be in charge of us, and that could exist too. But what about the you? The mind. You know, I talked about relationships earlier, and I mentioned how some people live a life in very unhealthy or even just unhealthy relationships with whomever. It could be a relationship between you and your coworkers. It could be a relationship between you and your boss. It could be any relationship. It could be you and your significant other, which I think tends to be the idea of what people consider a relationship, but it could be between anyone. It could be about anything. And I'm saying some people don't notice that there's an unhealthy functioning within that relationship. And regardless, we don't realize that there's a relationship with ourselves. And quite frankly, if the relationship with who we are is not really authentic, is really driven by these anxieties and these fears and these unrealized ways that are occurring, creating our reality, creating our existence, our ideas, and what we want to do and how we want to do it and what we think is right and what we think is wrong. If there's something that's helping to do that because it's coming from really not the healthiest place, it's helping us to avoid a problem or a situation or being wrong or what have you, not being good enough, then we wouldn't notice it. And we would say the relationship is fine with ourselves. And therefore, what would be fine as an extension is our relationship with our significant other. No, it's fine. Or we'd say our relationship at work would be fine, because it's fine. And we'd also rationalize it all as saying, well, nothing's perfect, and it could be worse. Who's saying that? Who's helping to protect that idea of it not being good enough or not being a problem? Or being a problem. What's the truth? So, here's the thing. If you are struggling outside yourself, just saying, and I'd like to speak generally about this, meaning that there could be a lot of truths with this. There could be some that don't really fit the mold of truth here, but I'd like to say most of it is. If things outside you aren't well, they're controlling you, they're dominating you, they're being the way they want, we'd maybe rationalize it all or say it's okay, or their family, or it's a situation, or I'd be like that too. And maybe within reason some of that is even helpful, but if we look at the whole situation, our whole life, we could realize that a lot of our relationships, a lot of our friendships, a lot of our where we worked, who we worked for, who we worked with, anybody. If there was struggles with that, and there were situations that weren't good, most likely, within ourselves, we could say there was almost an equilibrium, or a homeostasis, a balance between our outside world and our inside world. They almost seem to complement each other to some degree. To some degree, there's a comparison. That there's some kind of equality or balance. It doesn't have to be perfectly balanced like a seesaw, but within a certain range, there seems to be some play in where the outside of our experience in the world around us and the inside of our experience within the world within us, they seem to fluctuate within reason of complementing each other. And that's why we could say that maybe with a little bit more agreeability, I don't want to say certainness, being certain about this, but if we could try to work within agreeability, that there could be some complementary play here with what's happening within us is basically going to happen outside of our world, in the world in which we participate in. And what's happening outside of our world would complement, to a degree, what's actually occurring within us. The thing is, there's a reality we're not realizing. That reality is that there's something very unhealthy going on. And it all starts within us. Because the second that gets worked on, then our reality outside of us, we would say that's wrong. We would say no. We would work on the outside reality only because we work on the inside reality. And the only reason the outside reality is difficult to work with is because the inside reality is difficult to work with. When we work on the inside reality, as a natural consequence, the outside world, we would be able to look at it the way we're looking at it from within. Meaning, how we feel about ourselves, how we work from within, how we realize our fears, how we realize there's this thing going on that maybe we're not noticing, we're not paying attention, we're trying to be more, we're trying to find more authenticity, we're trying to be more of who we could actually be, who we would like to be, but at the same time, we now notice our reality can be looked at differently. Because quite frankly, our reality outside of us, how we experience it, could in fact be a direct reflection of how we feel about ourselves. How we are with who we are creates a complementary existence, inside and outside, that kind of seem to work together, and sometimes in a very harmonizing way. Which is why you could have a very unhealthy relationship, and let's say no one even knew. Not even the person you have the relationship with would know. And not even you would know. Because nothing's been brought to your attention. Even if it was, it's not that big of a deal. We start to normalize and rationalize and make it all okay. And we do all of these great things anyway, but there's toxic elements which we're not noticing. I'm not saying to make everything perfect, but what I'm saying is we end up creating our experience outside of us because how we end up creating the experience inside of us. So if let's say we are a manipulative person, or we are narcissistic, or we do have like personality issues and traits that are just not good, not healthy, like we lie, or we take advantage, or we're selfish, or we're needy, or we just do whatever we want, however we want, and it's like, I'm going to talk this way, I'm going to be this way, or I'm an avoidant person, or whatever the case. I can't tell people how I feel, or I don't know how to stand my ground, or I overdo it, or I underdo it, or it's like too much, or it's too little, and it's like, it's chaotic. That's not good. But you can see, however that is, and if you are a certain way, your outside world will reflect that. Let's say you do have an unhealthy relationship. Maybe there's a lot of arguing, or there's a lot of fighting, or there's a lot of this, or a lot of that, or someone's taking advantage, or someone's always telling you what to do, or someone's always contradicting, or someone's always pointing out errors, or someone just can't be wrong, and someone's not open-minded, and someone's more angry, and this and that, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, wait a second. I'm allowing that to occur. Because it's okay. It's not that big of a deal. And I do it too. Seems normal. By the way, my reality is just a reflection of my reality within. So, it's really not that big of a deal. And we distract ourselves, we avoid ourselves, we deny ourselves. And all I'm saying is, regardless of if any of this is true or not true, the point is, when are you going to actually take advantage of that there could be a possibility of you being controlled by your very own mind and not even notice it. And live your life in your happy, merry way, which could be fine. And I know that seemed a little sarcastic, but I don't mean it in a very horrible way. It's just, it kind of bothers me, it annoys me that this existence that we have, we don't even wake up to it. And it's sad. It's really sad. We're controlled by ourselves. That's horrible. If that is true, that is horrible. We have to come to our own truth. What is your truth? How could you find your truth? Does the truth evolve? Anyway, wanted to share. Just trying to, just trying to be helpful. This life isn't easy. Getting to know ourselves isn't easy. Finding true love within ourselves is definitely not easy. It's okay, but it's not okay to not be aware. It's just not okay, and we don't even notice it. It's like being told a lie. Let's say you believe something that was a truth your whole life, whatever it may be. It could be about anything. You believe something. Then one day, it's told you that was totally wrong. Totally wrong. You believe something that wasn't true your whole life. And maybe it's not that big of a deal, because it depends on what it's about. But maybe it is, because it depends on what it's about. I'll leave you with that. Sorry, but then again, I'm not. I just want us to live independently and to be free and to be truly who we actually are. Thanks for listening. Take care.